I mean, on every front, in Serbia, in Iran, in the United States, Anwar al-Awlaki, the 7-7 bombers, it turned out, was run by the admitted head of Al-Qaeda in England, who the British were supporting and protecting, and who's an MI6 asset. That's in my film Terror Storm, made 4.5, 5 years ago, 2007. Released 2007. I mean, British SAS caught dressed up as Sunnis running around in Basra shooting Iraqi police. On record. To get the Sunnis and Shiites killing each other. This is the strategy. It's so simple. The globalists hate America. They're dismantling the republic. This isn't the U.S. government. Our flag, our country, our money has been captured by the offshore globalists, the same ones destroying our liberties and our freedoms, launching these wars, ordering torture, using Hollywood they control to tell us torture is good, to destroy our name worldwide, to set us up later. Now, all of that said, it's turned out U.S. and British special forces have been there since before the fall of many areas of Libya. It turns out al-Baradi and the UN, globalist-backed, were in there bringing down Mubarak months ago. And now we learn it's not just U.S. and British special forces. Libya, U.S. fighter jet crash lands in field near Benghazi, an F-15. An F-15E bomber, fighter bomber, in there dropping bombs. You weren't told that in the news. You were told it was only cruise missiles. Our intel was they were launching aircraft bombers off those ships, and they are attacking. AFRICOM now confirms that that's going on. It is confirmed. And we're going to come back and talk with Webster Tarpley about this. Think about it. Al-Qaeda works for the globalist against everybody. Ray McGovern, former top CIA briefer to Ronald Reagan and George Herbert Walker Bush, will be joining us in the last hour to give us his breakdown on what's really happening in Libya. We'll also get his view on the ongoing cover-up at Fukushima. Bloomberg, the Associated Press, Reuters are reporting the radiation levels are increasing, getting into the ocean, getting into the air. Reports of Xenon-133 being picked up as far away as the east coast of the U.S., so that's already blanketed the U.S. Now, this is clearly developing to be worse than Chernobyl. There's an ongoing cover-up there. Now, we know that Anwar al-Awlaki is a known CIA operative. He's now the #1 in Al-Qaeda. Now, process that. The globalists know that's so bold, the average person won't get it. Fox News, AP, Anwar al-Awlaki secretly works for the Pentagon, secretly meets there with the head of the Army, the Secretary of the Army, and others. While he's on the most wanted list, and he runs all the major patsy attacks. I want Tarpley to first explain that and the history of Al-Qaeda attacking the Serbs. Then they respond, oh, it's humanitarian, we've got to go in. Now with Gaddafi, he's been saying for 3 weeks, this is Al-Qaeda. Now London Telegraph, BBC, CNN admit, wow, it's strange. This is Al-Qaeda out of Saudi Arabia with U.S. and NATO money pouring through Egypt. So hidden in plain view, 100%. And even the Pentagon and even West Point's own researchers study this and go, wow, it's weird. Al-Qaeda is supplying fighters. Well, 4 years ago, Bush put out a press release saying they were using 4 groups to attack inside Iran. Turned out 3 of the 4 were Al-Qaeda, one of them run by the #3 in Al-Qaeda. That was mainstream news. Al-Qaeda is a Western creation. So, Webster, before you get to the newest bombshell info, give them a brief history, because I'm showing folks Al-Qaeda's foreign fighters in Iraq, a first look at the Sinjar records. This is put out by West Point, by the top war strategist there. That dovetails with the Asia Times. Libyan rebellion has radical Islamicist fervor. Benghazi linked to Islamic militancy, U.S. military documents reveal. But let's continue. Here's the London Telegraph. The West and Al-Qaeda are on the same side. Al-Qaeda being funded by the West. Wesley Clark, we have this clip later, saying, which you said yesterday, we now have the video clip, saying that this is a 10-year-old plan to invade all these countries and to use Al-Qaeda to basically destabilize it. Explain to people how Brzezinski created it, what it is, how these rogue networks operate and how big this is, that here we're being told that there are these heroes, Al-Qaeda, that we've got to protect from Gaddafi. They call them protesters when they're not protesters. They have their own fighter jets that have crashed. They have their own tanks, their own missile launchers. And Gaddafi has said, I'm not saying he's an angel, folks. The point is, he's a lesser of two evils. He said to Obama yesterday, what would you do if rebels were launching missile attacks on cities? But our media calls them democratic protesters. Now Al-Qaeda is the good guys.
Well, the history of it, of course, is that the Al-Qaeda was created by the United States, by the CIA, by Robert Gates, actually, who was working for Brzezinski in the Carter administration and then under Reagan as a secret army. Al-Qaeda is a CIA secret army to be used against the Soviets in Afghanistan. And among the personnel that we've got added on later on, a younger and more energetic guy would be this double agent al-Laki, the CIA Laki, who's been used to sheep dip all kinds of people from Major Hassan to the guy with the Times Square bomb and so forth. However, the headline right now is the United Nations resolution and the entire NATO coalition and other countries too are now bombing Libya in defense of civilians, a humanitarian intervention in defense of civilians. Who are these civilians? Of course, they're armed gangs. They're a group of irregular military forces. But
who, by the way, are rounding up random people, robbing people. Mainstream news confirms that, lining them up and shooting them.
They're lynching black Africans. They're highly racist. They think any black person is a mercenary for Gaddafi. But the big headline is this: Northeast Libya, the hotbed of the rebellion, Benghazi, Tobruk, and Darna, is terrorist heaven. It's Al-Qaeda's #1 world recruiting ground. So the people that you're defending, U.S. Troops, are being risked today to defend the existence of the younger brothers of the suicide bombers who blew up American soldiers and others in Iraq. Let's just look at this study. I would recommend people take a look at it. It comes from the Combating Terrorist Center of the Department of Political Sciences, United States Military Academy, West Point, December 2007. And what we find in here is that the #1 country for recruiting suicide bombers and other terrorist fighters to go into Iraq and kill GIs is Libya. And the statistics are the following. Libya is a country with 6 million people. It nevertheless supplied 20% of the Al-Qaeda terrorists in Iraq. And this comes from essentially the U.S. captured the Al-Qaeda personnel file in a city called Sinjar near the Syrian border in October of 2007.
So one arm of the military captured the CIA's dossier of the Eastern recruiting ground that wasn't even really under the control of Gaddafi.
6 million people, 6.5 now, produced 20% of the terrorists in Iraq. Now, Saudi Arabia, with 25 million people, produced about 40%. So you get an idea that the Libyan contribution to the Al-Qaeda terrorist patsy, fanatic, psychotic presence in Iraq is much greater than the population. And now they even break it down according to cities. The #1 source of terrorist fighters going into Iraq, according to these Al-Qaeda personnel files, was Saudi Arabia, was Riyadh. So the city of Riyadh, with 4.3 million people, contributed 52 terrorists. Second place goes to the city of Darna in Libya with 51 terrorists, but Darna only has 80,000 people. So Riyadh, 52 terrorists, 4.3 million people. Darna, 51 terrorists, 80,000. It means that Darna, which is right there by the Egyptian border, it's part of the area being defended by the no-fly zone. This is terrorist heaven. This is the #1 terrorist recruiting center in the world in proportion to population. You go down the list, Mecca comes in third in Saudi Arabia with 43. That's a much larger city. The #4 is Benghazi with 21 terrorists. Benghazi is the capital of this rebel confederacy or coalition that the CIA has put together. So we now have this unbelievable situation where the United Nations and NATO and the United States are all saying a humanitarian emergency, we must intervene to protect the heroes of democracy from the evil dictator Gaddafi. And it turns out that the heroes of democracy are the younger brothers of the suicide bombers who went into Iraq and killed American soldiers and other members of the international coalition, as well as Iraqis. And at the same time this is going on, the U.S. is bombing Pakistan. Predator drones are over Pakistan right now, killing people in the name of fighting Al-Qaeda, even as the United States is joining hands with Al-Qaeda and defending them against Gaddafi.
All right, let me stop you, and then I want you to continue, Dr. Tarpley, with your breakdown. But for people that don't understand full spectrum dominance, for people that don't understand the true strategy here or the stratagem, correct me, or I know I'm not wrong, but elaborate on what I'm about to say. You have a giant global corporate globalist combine that's basically a mafia that's waging war against the nation state, whether it's America, Libya, it doesn't matter, that uses slick propaganda and packaging. They need the multi-trillion-dollar-a-year wars, the multi-trillion-dollar-a-year U.S. defense budget alone. They've got to manufacture threats. And so the average American sees it like, oh, America wants to go beat Al-Qaeda. And then they don't understand, well, then why is Al-Qaeda always funded and working for the globalists? Because that's how they start the wars. That's how they create the pretext. They use this secret army to destabilize any area they want as the pretext to then invade. Look at a chessboard. If they want to invade a certain country on the map, they put the Al-Qaeda piece into that map, and then they can stage it themselves, or their patsies can stage it as a pretext to put in sanctions, no-fly zones, invasions, whatever they want. That's what Al-Qaeda is. So people who look at this like, well, Al-Qaeda doesn't work for us. Well, there is no us. We don't run this country anymore. We're run by the globalists who use us as their overall global engine of modern neo-colonialism. And Al-Qaeda is this convenient boogeyman or a pretext to invade or attack or destabilize any country they want to go into. And you can't get around that historical fact that they do work for the New World Order.
Al-Qaeda is essentially a pool of patsies, of fanatics, of fighters, of psychotics, of militants who can be used. The ideology of Al-Qaeda is that all existing Arab and Islamic Muslim governments are illegitimate. None of them represents the caliphate. They say that the caliphate is the form of government that is prescribed by the holy books, and therefore none of them are any good. So with Al-Qaeda, you immediately have a way to attack any existing Arab government. Case in point, the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group. The Libyan Islamic Fighting Group, their line is, Gaddafi is an apostate. Gaddafi is somebody who might once have been a Muslim, but he's now an apostate. He's a heretic. He's gotten out of his religion. He's turned into a secularist. This Libyan Islamic Fighting Group has transmogrified. They changed themselves into Al-Qaeda of the Islamic Maghreb. And you can look at their website, Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb. Their website says, down with Gaddafi, down with the dictator, long live the wonderful fighters and heroes of Benghazi and Tobruk and Darna. And don't forget Darna, because Darna is the place. That's terrorist heaven, Al-Qaeda heaven. And this is what the U.S. has allied with now.
But Webster, isn't this West Point report, the left hand not knowing what the right hand's doing?
Well, you know, life is complicated, and it's impossible to control everything. And when you're improvising these crazy operations from one year to the next, the problem with any covert operation is it can't be kept secret over time because you've got to redeploy the assets. In other words, the West Point report says right now in Iraq, this is giving us a hard time, right? Because the Bush-Cheney line was the presence of Al-Qaeda is used to justify a U.S. military attack, right? That would be Zarqawi and the Al-Qaeda in Iraq. But now under Obama, you're not using Al-Qaeda as a way to attack it because it's there. You're saying Al-Qaeda are now redefined as the heroes of democracy, and we're going to bomb the country in order to protect them. So it's
because that's the globalist asset they've got in each country. Isn't this a replay of Kermit Roosevelt and the CIA and British MI6 in 1953 with Mossadegh, who was even pro-Western but wouldn't give everything over to BP, then Anglo-American Oil. And so they used the Muslim extremist to overthrow the government. Then they double-crossed them and put the puppet Shah in.